Male gametes. That's what makes me male.
No, your sperm don't make you male.
Then what does?
It's a constellation.
In reality, in truth, okay?
Whose truth are we talking about?
The same truth that says we're sitting in this room right now, you and I.
No, you're not listening.
If I see a chicken laying eggs and I say that's a female chicken laying eggs, did I assign female, or am I just observing a physical reality that's happening in the world?
Does a chicken have gender identity? Does a chicken cry?
Well,
Does a chicken commit suicide?
Does a chicken cry? Very interesting question. Let's have a bit of a think about what's going on here. To make the point, I'd like to detour back to an old story. Years and years ago, I was out with an ex-girlfriend of mine and some friends, and there was a lady in the group that we were out with, and she saw an expensive car, like an expensive sports car, and she's like, oh, that's hot, that's sexy. That's sexy. And so me being very analytical, I started thinking probably 15 years ago, what's the connection between a car and sex? I was like, we don't want to shag the car. So why do you associate, why do you use that word? And, you know, and I know it on one level, it's like, it's just trendy to call everything sexy. It's just like, yeah, okay, if that's good, it's sexy. But I think there's more to it than that. And I thought so at the time. And so, I mean, now I understand that, you know, an expensive car signifies their social signals of resources and safety, security, provision, and a lot of things that women do find attractive in a man, and status. So her brain is just going to go, those are things I want. I'm seeing a social signal of the availability of resources that I want. That's great. And then she's going to go, cool, I'm going to associate that with a partner, man, can get that through sex. Therefore, the car gets me thinking about the guy I've got to shag to get access to those resources and that safety and lifestyle and status, blah, blah, blah. It's not very complicated, but I just wish someone had explained this to me 20 years ago, which is why I do these videos, by the way, is a big element of it is like, I wish I knew this stuff 20 years ago. So I'm trying to pass that benefit on to you, fellow travelers, and especially any of the younger people out there trying to make sense of the world. But one of the things that I always reference is this science, this psychological science from Simon Baron-Cohen, the idea of the spectrum between empathetic and systematic brains. I talk about it all the time. It's a fascinating idea. And I think it has a lot of explanatory power in our modern world and our modern political landscape. So to add another level of analysis to that, if you've got a more systematic brain, you see this all the time, like look at anything like music, buildings, cars, whatever, the systematic, overwhelmingly the blokes who with more systematic tending towards, and once again, it's not exact, it's just an average, on average, a lot of masculine guys, their brains would be more systematic, and a lot of feminine people, their brains would be more empathetically tilted. That's what the theory says. And so when you look at a car, all the guys turn around and go, oh yeah, mate, yeah, so it's got the twin turbo, inline six. Oh, it's turbo diesel? No, mate, she's petrol. Yeah, cool. Oh, quad turbo, you say? Yeah, bloody beautiful, fantastic, you know? What tyres you got in that one? Oh, yeah, you know, the Pirellis are good. Yeah, you know, they're good. Oh, I've got Continentals on mine, but, you know, they're all good. It's good, mate, yeah. Whereas the empathy brains will go, that's hot. Oh, my God, it's black. You know, or they look at the lines and the sparkle of it. Oh, it's clean, you know. I mean, so I remember this too when I was a kid. I used to look at things like a house, and it's only when I got older and understood things and saw things in more detail that I go, oh yeah, cool, look, this is the materials. These are all the composite parts that build this structure, and it comes together as one thing. Whereas when I was a kid, I used to just go house, and I used to get an impression of the house as a discrete concept. But now, you know, once again, you learn more things, you get a bit more sophisticated, you see the parts that make everything up. And I think that comes hand in hand as well with having a brain that's tilted more to the systematic side. So once again, you see a car, you might judge you see it as a system, of course, but then you can see and analyze and see all the parts of the system working together to create that thing. Whereas if you're more empathetic, it's just like, oh, car, status, color, vibe. I'm getting a vibe. You know what I mean? That's what's going on. And so in a lot of ways, I'll call this video the rise of the empathy brains, because politically, that's kind of what's happening, is the ascendance of the empathy brains. And so when you look at that clip that I opened with, does a chicken cry? Matt's being a little bit more tilted towards the masculine systematic, and the healthcare professional is tilted more towards the feminine empathetic. And he's saying, but what are the parts that make up a boy or a girl? What are the genes? He's talking about the gametes, my body produces sperm. And so she's like, but just much like the car, you could start saying, well, is that a V6 or is it an inline six, like single, twin, turbo, like what's going on? How big's the cylinders? Etc. You start talking about the actual engine or the parts, and they just go cross-eyed. They're like, it's black. I get a feeling. And so once again, she's expressing that empathy brain thing. She's like, well, I don't want to upset the kids. I don't want to trigger a bad social vibes. So she's like, well, you might say that this kid is not the opposite sex that it is, but brings up the chicken thing, but does a chicken cry? Is a chicken going to kill itself? She's like, yeah, but I'm dealing in the world of emotions because I'm an empathy brain. And so a lot of what's going on with this type of issue is just the empathy brains just taking things at the level of vibe and not going, well, this is the parts that make up that system, because they're blind to it. I mean, so that's the other part of the theory that we hypothesize about a lot, is that if you are sufficiently tilted towards the systematic, you're going to be a little bit empathy blind. And so what you're talking there is basically nerds. The whole thing about nerds is they're not the best at being cool, and being cool means appropriate social signaling, maybe dressing a certain way, acting a certain way, mannerisms, way you walk, all that sort of thing. But when it comes down to a system like a systematic game or computers or whatever, they're like, oh, great, it's systems, I can work out this sort of stuff. But they struggle in the social realm to navigate those social signals. And so systematic, empathy blind, but the opposite is also true. So what is the extreme opposite of a nerd? An uncool brainiac nerd. Well, the extreme opposite is that woman saying, it's a car. What are the details about the car? It goes forward. It's black. It makes me think of hot guys who make lots of money. Where are they? That's what's going. So when you say, but are you actually the opposite gender? But it cries. And that's what it says. And I don't want to upset it. Is it going to kill itself because we can't harm the babies? And right now, and that's another element too, is like now versus over time. So another element of this with the, empathetic, systematic, blah, 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 that Matt's saying is, over time, are you harming this person? She's like, but right now, I'm empathetically responding to the emotions of this person that's saying that they're really upset if I don't castrate them. So once again, that's what's going on. It's really not hard to piece this together politically either, because whenever you criticize the left, one of the main attacks they'll throw at you is, well, you've got no empathy, you're heartless. If you were heartless, you would give us X, you would do this, you would call them the pronouns if you had heart. But once again, it is an in time wanting to evade social conflict. It's not an overtime doing what's best for somebody. And this is a funny thing too, because, this is the tie with communism and socialism politically, is communism's never going away because it's based on intuitions in some people that are never going away. Communism is the proper structure of a family. You know, when I have something to eat and my kid sees it, it's like, I've got to share. You know, I'm not going to get away with having it to myself and telling my 1-year-old son to pull himself up by the bootstraps. That's just not going to happen. And so communism is the actual correct structure of the family. So when you want to institute it politically at a national scale, all you really have to do is interrupt the process of people growing out of the family structure, i.e. growing into adults. All you have to do is interrupt their growing up and infantilize them, and then they start to see the society as the family and demand communism because they're the dependents. And once again, the empathy brains treat the people in society, they're like psychological proxies for children. So they're like, oh, you can't do this, it's hurting the kids now. But what a lot of the conservatives are doing and that sort of thing are trying to say, you got to grow up. You've actually got to mature your mind. You have to adapt. You have to make peace with reality. So you might be a confused person that's not happy about your life, but you don't get to then create this fantasy that you're somebody else just so that you can bypass growing up, so that you can evade the cognitive costs of adapting your brain to reality and your place within it. So that's usually what people like me are saying, is like, you actually have to grow up, because what we want is a society full of people who are adults, who are grown up, can take care of themselves, who aren't burdens on society, who don't see themselves as the children in a national-sized family or even a global family these days. Whereas the other side is very much that, I've called it the devouring mother. The archetype, the psychological archetype of the devouring mother is that the mother that parents so hard that they infantilize and create dependence. They never let the children leave. They never let the children grow up. And it's like this Munchausen by proxy. She gets the attention and validation and probably resources in the real world by infantilizing and maintaining people as their dependents, their children as their dependents. And that's actually evil. It's actually completely evil. And that's so politically, that's kind of what's going on as well, is a lot of the empathy brains infantilizing people because they won't let other people, they fight so hard against other people saying, no, this is actually what the truth is. And instead of you running and hiding under your bed sheets and living in this fantasy world where you feel better about the way the world actually is, we don't want to change the world. We want you to grow up. We want the world to get less scary by you actually growing up. And that goes back to that same clip, is a Matt saying, yeah, but this isn't actually the truth. This is the way the world is. And, we can get to a nice place if you grow up and you adapt your mind. Whereas essentially what's really going on is that growing up can be kind of hard and painful sometimes. I think it's completely worth it and also a lot of fun, but, depends on your individual temperament and circumstance, I guess. But for a lot of people, yeah, it seems to be a very tough ask to get them to actually grow up mentally, in their life and physically as well, So ironically, castrating them from their mental development is manifesting itself in castrating them from their physical development as well. That's a funny irony, but really it starts with castrating people mentally, interrupting their development mentally, and the tilt towards the primacy of empathy, of choosing empathy over truth, choosing the evasion of social conflict over the truth. That's where we're going, and that's why this is manifesting so much, is I don't want to cause social waves, or let's all live in the lie. And once again, and that's why it's kind of like the empathy brains going for communism. What is Jordan Peterson saying about communism? Well, the thing that demarcates the communist totalitarian systems is that everybody lives under the lie. And that's what I'm saying here. So, everybody's living in a delusion, and they're doing that to evade the costs of social conflict. And because the empathy brains don't like it, because they're saying, no, don't make me grow up and have to make peace with the world and my reality. I want to imagine this utopia where I'm higher status than I am and I can be anything I want. And so once again, you see the personal interaction between Matt and this lady. You see this happening everywhere. You look at all these women who are pushing for gender transitions, and what do they say? Well, you're going to hurt the feelings of this person if you don't give in to them. You're going to hurt their feelings. They're cry bullies. And that's where you get communism. Everyone starts living in a lie, in a delusion, because you can't make conflicts decidable in empirical reality because they attack you for the empirical reality of things. So, once again, the rise of the empathy brains, the rise of the system-blind empathy brains. It's another... I mean, I just see it everywhere. I see it all the time. Like, if you think about this idea of social signaling, another one for the young men out there is like, well, why do young women seem to date such douchebags? Well, there's an element of the guys that call themselves nice guys. They're not actually nice. They're just weak. And women don't like weakness because you'd be really honest with a lot of women, they're kind of scared of everything. And so they feel better. They have a huge reduction of their anxiety and neuroticism when they find a man that is strong, that they can rely on to help them out, protect and provide for them in a lot of ways. That's pretty basic, healthy male-female dynamic stuff, is that, women like strong men. And you want strong, good men too, but, so many men have been feminized and abused and gaslit and manipulated out of healthy, positive masculinity, that the two poles that are left are toxic masculine douchebags and weak, nice guys. And, there's a million people talking about that stuff on the internet, so I don't need to go over it too much. But the other element to it is that some men understand more intuitively social signaling. And so the empathy brains are highly attuned to social signaling. And what this really means in practice is that they have less capacity to understand what things actually are. They deal with things more on the level of what they look like, what the signals represent that they are. And so this is kind of scary too when you think about it, because, say, like another example, the Matildas, it was a football team, and it was a football team in Australia, and I think they made it to the World Cup. They got fourth, and so people were saying, well, why do we have to celebrate them so much when they became fourth? I mean, third, even third's a place, but fourth isn't actually a place. What's the big deal? But what happened was that to the point where they were plastered everywhere, and every government bureaucrat was going on and crying over the Matildas and how they're just new national heroes. But they've got I think they called them the gayest team out there, the gayest team. So the highest percentage of lesbians. And so one of the main players, they could plaster of, I think she was a black lesbian. And so, you got your intersectionality victim points there everywhere. And so they could plaster throughout the entire media a black lesbian kissing another woman and saying, yeah, the Matildas. So what I think was going on there is an artificial social construction. And social construction is what the lefty empathy brains do, is they kind of just decide amongst themselves what the truth is. And once again, if you're driven by empathy rather than ability to perceive and understand systems, i.e. truth, i.e. reality, then what the social consensus is going to drive your perception of reality much more than what the truth is. And that's what they were doing, is they kind of happy clap to themselves over and over again until they create their own reality in their minds. Reality through chanting is another way to put it. And so what happened was that some people pushed back and said, well, why are we celebrating these people so much that didn't even place? Like, cool, you're a good team, but like it's over the top. You're actually getting rid of like world champion athlete statues to put a statue of of a fourth place team, you know, like erecting statues in the city, that kind of sort of thing. And then you see the responses of the people doing this, and they said, yeah, but they were the most watched game or something, or they cited some figures about how many people were actually watching this team. And they wouldn't understand this, but I saw it immediately. It's just circular logic, is so that we've socially constructed this team's status. Now, and then we all watched it, and then when you say, well, what are you basing this status, this social construction of their status on? And they say, well, it's based on the fact that we all watched it. You know, so they socially construct the status, and you say, what's that based on? Well, it's based on the fact that we all agree that they're high status. And so it became a self-reinforcing social construction cycle, and that's what they do. So you see this politically as well. You know, what does all this boil down to? I hope you find this stuff fascinating. I do. What does all this boil down to? Well, if you're looking for the truth, people talk. You know, people talk, and if you're like you or me, people like you and I, we tend to think that if someone's talking, they're doing it to describe reality, or that there's some logical thought in there, but it's actually pretty scary. But the degree to which they're just social constructing, saying, well, this is the truth. Why? Because everyone's saying so, and I'm primarily driven by an empathetic ability to read other people's emotions, and I don't want to cause social conflict, and I want to evade the responsibility of paying the costs of going through a social conflict to do something like discern the actual truth of the matter. It means that there's nothing there. There's nothing there. They're just basically making it up. And so when you see some of these like tells, when you see people with their language, you can read, like, you know, I've been looking at this so long, I can kind of read people's language like Neo can read the Matrix. It's like, you know, she's like, oh, well, does a chicken cry? Cool, you're an empathy brain. It means, you know, if you're talking about emotions, you're going to have wants. I will listen to your emotions. But if it's something substantial like how to fix a car, how to run a society at scale and over time, you know, you might as well be asking me what it's like to breastfeed. I have no fucking idea. Like, I can't trust you as far as I can kick you, because you're a rampant, reality blind empathy brain. And, you know, politically, I think this over time is going to have pretty severe implications. But that's what's going on with a lot of these things, you know, social signaling, social construction, empathy brains, lack of reason. And how do you, I mean, this is why the left is on the rampage now. How do you reason with people that can't reason? Well, you can't. They're a rampant runaway cult, and they're living in their own fantasy delusions. And at some point, you know, nature will have to impose its limits on this silliness. What would be better is if other people, normal people with some logical faculties, impose limits on them as a proxy for nature, because I'm telling you now that other people acting as proxies for nature will be a lot kinder than nature. But, you know, even when they say, oh, it's completely reversible, don't worry, it's completely reversible. They say that, you, like, once again, this is the mind virus. This is the way they get into your brain, and the way they sort of propagate these ideas is they speak. They wear the costume of somebody that can, you know, make a logical deduction, or, you know, understand reality at some level. And so they say, oh, it's completely reversible. Don't worry about it. It's safe and effective. Don't worry about it. But what these people are usually doing is wearing reasonableness, wearing intelligence, wearing logical capacity as a costume. That's all they're doing. So yeah, the more I've learned to just say, no, I can tell that you're an extreme empathy brain, and it's not even that you don't want to be logical. I'm really skeptical as time goes on that you even have the capacity for it. That puts you in a much better way to navigate, a much better place for navigating the world we find ourselves in at the moment until things change. A lot of these people, when you hear them carrying on and saying silly things like, does a chicken cry? You know that they're just a lemming cultist. And so when they try and tell you, oh, this is factual, or this is reversible, or this thing is safe and effective, or no, the studies have been done and renewables can be cheaper and this and blah, blah, blah. It's like you can't trust them as far as you can kick them, because I mean, in the cases of when, like the lady at the start, they say silly things like, well, does a chicken cry? Does a chicken kill itself? It's like what she's doing is speaking about the emotions. Another little tell, too, is if you say something like, well, generally women vote left. I don't even, that depends on where you are, if that's actually true, but just make a blanket statement like that. That is a statement of generalization. That is a statement of statistical fact or not. And the empathy brain will personalize everything and say, well, but I didn't. Well, it only really has to be, true 60% of the time to be an average, to be on average true. Like, it's just say, women do this 60% of the time, men do this 40% of the time, or vice versa. And you say, well, as a generalization, X is true. They say, well, I know somebody who doesn't do that. So when you go from over time, at scale, distributions and statistics to personal experience, so that person's telling you, I'm an empathy brain, so I'm just going to filter everything through my personal experience, and that's how I form my opinions about the world. Not sure what else I want to say on that. I hope that was informative. But yeah, look, I think the takeaway with this too is to understand this empathy versus systematic thing, and the degree to which either are lacking is quite fascinating. And once again, we all understand, because the lefties make it very clear that they consider those on the right to be lacking in empathy. And they turned that into a meme and a political attack very successfully. But the reciprocal is that they're lacking in logic. That's the reciprocal thing. And so I think we need to raise awareness of that. That's why I do this, and I point to these sort of things, these studies, that to raise awareness of that. It's like, look, these people are not logical. They speak, but they wear costumes. They put on a white coat and they tell you this jab is safe and effective, but they're just wearing a costume. They don't know. I'm not even sure a lot of them can even know. Okay, I'm not sure that they can or will ever try to discern the truth in the face of overwhelming social consensus. So once again, it's not a black and white thing, like you are either empathetic or systematic. It's not a light switch thing. It's a supply demand curves. And so what you see there is, in a situation where it's not hard, there's no emotional cost to being logical. If you go to any of these people and you say, how many apples are on the table? And they just count and say, well, there's 3. Cool. What if I take away 1? How many left? 2. Nobody's not going to say that. But when the emotional cost of being logical goes up, their capacity for it goes down. So when you say something like, okay, well, men do this and women do this on average, and if they get a little bit sensitive about what that implies, then they're just going to shut down that logical facility. And a person who's more systematic will have much greater ability to be less upset about that and maintain a logical frame, whereas the reverse is going to be true. So you put them in any state of conflict, and what happens is they revert back to, like water finds its lowest common denominator, it finds the easiest path to the lowest point to settle. Their brain goes to the easiest pathway through making sense of that statement and just goes, empathy, you're just bad. No, I know someone personally that doesn't do that, therefore you're just trying to be mean. Chickens don't cry, but my transgender kid will kill itself, therefore this is all reversible, it's safe and effective, everybody says that the world's going to boil over, and you're a Nazi. And racist, probably. and a bigot and a homophobe and blah, 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 blah. So once again, there's another element to understanding this is as the costs go up, people's brains revert back to the easiest pathway through making sense or reacting to a situation, which goes back to their intrinsic bias. It doesn't mean that, I actually think at the extremes, like that lady at the start, she would be a very extreme example of the empathy brain, and I'm skeptical of her ability to be logical at all over going shopping. But for most people too, like they'll tilt towards a certain way, but as a conflict puts their brain in stress, as the costs go up, their brain will look for the cheapest way to make the cheapest pathway through an issue, and that'll often express itself as their bias, their intrinsic bias. So once again, you say something that upsets people, and then the truth comes out. You upset conservatives, and they say that's not even true. You upset conservatives, and they say, but you literally do that. Imagine if we did that to you. That's what they all say, because they're saying, well, yeah, logically, you're not acting from a point of principle here. You're contradicting yourself. To notice that something's contradictory, you need to be able to see if it's internally non-contradictory, which is logic, which means you need to sense, logic is a systematic brain. So systematic brains are more sensitive to internal non-correspondence, so internally contradictory. Therefore, the left goes, oh, well, we're going to do this thing, but then we're going to accuse you of it. And then so this, in a state of conflict, conservatives are always like, that's self-contradictory. Or like I saw with the social construction thing, like that's the circular logic. And that's the arguments that they rely on that come naturally to them, systematic arguments, whereas the left just calls you evil because they're emotional empathy brains. As for the answer, there are a lot of possibilities, big fields of possibilities, but I think one thing that is a productive takeaway right now is to understand this, is we actually need more people to understand it doesn't make sense. They're making it up within themselves to create a facade that justifies their incentives and their self-interest. That's all that's going on. I hope you found that interesting. I sure do.